with a few moments with the eyes closed. Closing the eyes, taking a few deeper breaths. Centering ourselves through the spine. Centering ourselves in the middle of the chest and the feeling of intimacy with the self. Beyond any forms, stillness. The topic today is Asteya, which is the third yama. Asteya means theft. Asteya means non-theft. A being the negation again. And it's this inner attitude of not taking what doesn't belong to you. And remember, all the yamas are attitudes to bring more transparency into our being. So investigate where there might be masks, limitations, or conditionings that are holding us back from connecting, being transparent, being open, and being fresh. So what is stealing? What is it doing? Stealing, as maybe you know, is affirming to our subconscious that we are not worthy or able to acquire the things that we need. So it's sending a message to the universe, which is really our subconscious mind, that we don't have the capacity to acquire what we need. We're not worthy, we're not able. It sends messages that affirm weakness, neediness, and lack. And this is not a beneficial practice. Of course, a beneficial resonance for the yoga practice, and of course it's not a beneficial resonance in most endeavors of our life. To have a resonance of weakness, neediness, or lack. It's a subtle and a gross attitude. So gross for objects, in terms of actual physical objects, but also subtly in terms of stealing time, someone's attention, someone's ideas, someone's presence. So we'll go through these different layers. Once again, the reason that we're considering this is because stealing is affirming the limitations of a personal identity, of the ego, fear, conditioning. And of course, the extreme of it is even a pathological condition called kleptomania, where there's just an unconscious stealing happening, but we can even question if the stealing that happens in normal, healthy people's lives is also an unconscious, almost like a disease, where we are not in control of our actions. Why do we steal? So the main cause of stealing and theft is desire and fear. And desire and fear are expressions of the lower chakras, unharmonious expressions of the lower chakras. Fear, of course, on the root chakra, and the desire on Svadhisthana chakra. Of course, as yogis, and spiritual practitioners and meditators, we've probably considered, and maybe we don't shoplift and we don't steal from our friends or these really obvious ways of stealing, but there's a much subtle much more subtle metaphysic to this concept of stealing, that it still is an excellent practice to consider. It's still up there with the very, very valuable investigations that we can do to start to open ourselves from the foundation of our spiritual practice. So it doesn't seem as enlightening or awakening, but really these are the foundations from which an awakening and an enlightenment and a spiritual experience can come, is from being grounded in the yamas and niyamas. So we get to question, why are we stealing? And we'll speak about the subtle forms. And this investigation is building self-awareness. It's providing us the opportunity for reflection, introspection, and the capacity to do these things. It also helps us to control desires and cravings. When we bring on awareness to something that we might want to take, it helps us to reduce wanting and to deepen our understanding of how we relate to objects. It helps us, especially when we catch ourselves in these subtle forms of asteya or of steya, we start to come into alignment with truth and the transparency to life. It provides the benefit of honor, a clean conscience, which are fitness for the practice of yoga. So of course, yoga fitness isn't just about muscular strength, but having a clear conscience and a still mind and a transparency to life. These yamas are preparing and clearing and purifying our being so we can sit in meditation with ease. Less fluctuations of the mind, and opening up Manipura chakra in a sense of courage. And also it's providing the freedom from past impressions left by any dishonest or unharmonious actions. Aparigraha, Satyam, and Asteya are all helping us to investigate how we possess things, what our relationship is to the objects, and why we have these cravings, why we feel like we need something, or why we feel like we need to deceive someone. Interestingly enough, also hoarding is a form of stealing. So holding on to something is stealing from someone else. It's worth it to make another mention about presence and relevance in circumstances. So again, these are not just rules that we have to obey, but actually to consider how they're relevant to us and to open up again this inner compass to help us navigate through the life from a place of transparency rather than from a place of conditioning. So all the yamas are meant to be an expression of the purity of our hearts. We need to consider each individual circumstance and which action will be the most authentic with pure intention. An interesting concept is time, so how we can steal time from other people. One of the ways would be to not be concise with your words. So small talk and gossiping and unnecessary speech is a way of stealing someone's time. Speaking not the truth. Also, of course, being late is a way of not considering the other person and in some way stealing their time. Not completing a project well so that another person has to finish it for us is a way of stealing their time. Stealing people's peace of mind and silence as well by disturbing them, or which would also be related to the practice of ahimsa. And from yourself, not prioritizing your own time and focusing on things that are valuable is the way of stealing time from yourself, which again is just this not being present and not being conscious, not honoring the gift of life that we've been given. Our teacher Sahajananda from Hridaya Yoga always takes this absolute perspective, or we love how he often takes the absolute perspective. So he says, ultimately we are stealing our time and energy from ourselves when we are lost in irrelevant activity and thoughts. So if we're lost in irrelevant activity and thoughts, we're stealing time from ourselves. So Asteya, like the other yamas, provides a relief and a simplicity in our life. We can trust. We should trust. And this was a real revolution inside myself. Actually, I've spoken about this many times before. There was very, very early on in my yoga practice, someone made a comment, and at that time I was still very much not really knowing a truer perspective about stealing and craving and deceiving. And I had this stingy kind of nature of always trying to grab at money. And someone said this comment that we were not put on this earth to struggle for money. And it just absolutely clicked for me that the reason that I'm here is not to struggle for money. Maybe that happens, but that's not why I'm here. And there was some part of me that really trusted the greater reason for my existence, and that if the greater reason for my existence was never, not even actually a little bit, to struggle after money, then that is an activity and an energy that when I remember, I can actually let go of. So maybe out of habit and out of conditioning, I'll grab after or worry about or stress or struggle for money, or try to hold on to it and make sure that I'm getting my due, whatever is due to me. But I actually honestly believed in that moment, it made perfect sense that that wasn't really why I was here. That might be a mistake that I make at any time, that I struggle after money, but it's not actually why I'm here. And Asteya confirms that, and so does Aparigraha, the non-hoarding, where it's really providing us this simplicity in our life. That's actually a noise and a struggle and an agitation in our life that is not really why we're here, and we actually can let it go. We can trust, we should trust in life that everything will be provided. Maybe it doesn't resonate for all people, and they actually believe that that is part of my journey, is to struggle for money. That's something that is part of my path, but for myself in that moment, it actually didn't feel like really my journey was to struggle after money. There's a beautiful quote. It's that the more elevated the consciousness of the society is, the less rules are needed. So there are so many rules and laws. Sometimes, I'll be thrown back into the world for something for business and accounting and law, and I'll just see the rules and rules and rules and the laws, and about how business needs to be conducted and who needs to sign for this and what needs to happen here and what needs to be paid to the government here and the taxes are like this. And I'm like, whoa, there's so many rules there, which is basically confirming that people aren't able to regulate themselves, and that all of these rules are there because the consciousness of society is so low that it needs to be regulated with all of these rules. In every state it's different, and in every country it's different. But then funnily enough, also when you look at those rules, there's no conscience to it. It's just rules. They're not actually to promote the well-being. That's what they originally were for, I'm sure, in some sense, but they've actually just started to regulate the rules themselves, and it's just dead and lifeless, and it's only about the rules themselves. It's not actually about supporting human beings to blossom. In fact, so much of it is actually keeping them tight. So even the rules of the society that we live in are so dead and so pointless and so circular and not deep, so superficial. It's incredible how the rules are there to actually protect the sense of individualism, separatism, and fear. That's actually what the rules are there to proliferate. It's mind-blowing. And of course, they've been born out of the fact that society doesn't believe that it can regulate itself, and that's because there's no compass. We're not taught how to regulate ourselves. We're not taught how to connect to openness, freedom, life, and the transparency of our being and purity of intention. So like all of the yamas, we can see what Patanjali's perfection is. So in chapter 2, verse Sutra 37, Patanjali says that when grounded in non-stealing, asteya, all kinds of treasures are revealed to him. So again, this is something that can be interpreted any way that we like, but basically is that he's saying the perfection of not being so aligned with not stealing, so aligned with the universal energy of abundance, then of course all treasures are revealed to him. So a couple of contemplations here. Are there subtle forms of theft or habitual forms of theft that we regularly engage in? Maybe a little bit stealing from the parking meter, or stealing a little bit from work, or taking something from even the home. What message are you sending out when you committed that theft? And do you justify small thefts from the workplace, government, community, or the family? Be watchful for the mind's excuses, such as nobody will notice, it's such a small thing, I will give it back later, this is surely included in the price I paid, they've charged me too much for that other thing I got, so I might take this as a little extra. So some opposite attitudes that we can practice that basically are like the antidote for the theft are practicing generosity, practicing introspection about subtle theft, refraining from any gross theft whatsoever, contemplating which areas of your life can you share more of yourself, your own time and your energy, these intangible assets, offering your gifts and your treasures with the world as it's being asked of you. So offering your time and your expertise without worrying if you'll be paid. Authenticity and courage. So to conclude our final thoughts on Asteya, that non-stealing is really about this very important part of our practice, which is trust. So I know for me, almost my entire spiritual journey has this theme around trust, that returning back to trust and allowing the flow of life, trusting in existence, trusting in truth, trusting in the openness, trusting in the absolute is what I always return to in my spiritual practice. It's really the antidote for any limitations that I'm experiencing. And non-theft for sure is inviting us to just trust that we don't need to struggle after money or possessions. And in fact, it lets us contemplate the way that we need or take objects. And of course, it's an invitation to become more transparent to the interconnectedness of all things. So we can conclude with a moment of silence. Letting all the words and the sounds and the ideas melt away into this background of stillness.